Harley Davidson will not support any motorcycle older than 10 years old now. That doesn't make sense, surely. Let's get into it.
RevelatorAlf.
Hello, welcome to RevelatorAlf. I hope you're all well. So this video is about Harley Davidson, the motor company, and the dealerships. There has been a suggestion out of the ether, let's say, that from next year, Harley Davidson will not be supporting any motorcycle that is over 10 years old. Really? That surely can't happen. So there is a basic industry standard that any motorcycle that is discontinued, the manufacturer has to provide support for a further 10 years, and I think in some countries it's up to 15 years as well. But it doesn't necessarily mean that all the parts come from the manufacturer. Let's say Harley Davidson. It could be that they're just part suppliers, and you can get those parts from XYZ part suppliers, you see, for your particular model of motorcycle in this case. Now, if you go onto the Harley Davidson website, you can track parts back down to 1984. That's 38 years old. However, these are not your engine parts or anything like that. These are basically just bling accessories for the most part. If you want actual parts for your bike, and the chances of getting them through Harley Davidson dealership direct and from the motor company is a rarity. Actually, what is likely to happen if you do go to a dealership, that they'll go to a parts supplier themselves and get it from there for you. It has been said quite often that Harley Davidson dealerships in particular, because we're talking about Harley Davidsons, right? Some dealerships around the world, this is not a standard of course, let's say if there's any bike over 5 years old, 10 years old in particular, that they won't want to touch them, they won't want to work with them. And this is becoming quite common now, that the dealerships themselves, the main dealerships, don't work on older machines, but then you have independent workshops that will spring up who will work on them, of course. So if we take the M8 engine on my Softail here, and also on the Taurus, now they've been out for, well, the Taurus since 2017, so that's 5 years now. We're in 2022, of course. So that means many of the dealerships now are going to be changing their focus, or moving their focus away from M8 engines, and they're going to be going more to the Revolution Max engine. So in turn, this gives the opportunity for independent workshops to spring up, and they may specialize in particular engines, let's say like the Milwaukee 8. Now, of course, there might be other workshops that only specialize in Evos, or they specialize in twin cams. There may be many independent workshops who cover a whole raft of Harley Davidson models from many years back. So it really depends where you are, which local workshops you have, what access they have to information and parts suppliers, and also what the nearest dealership is and what their attitude is to older bikes, if they're willing to work on them, so on and so forth. Now, it's got to be said that as we know, Harley Davidsons in particular do tend to get worked on and customized quite a lot. So you can get an older Harley Davidson that's been modified in so many ways, and actually it becomes inefficient or uneconomical for a dealership to even touch it. They won't want to touch it because they have no idea what the owner or previous owners have done to it. You're basically getting a bike that's a basket case. You've got a new owner who wants somebody else to fix it, and a dealership will say, well, we're not touching that. So when this has been suggested in previous years, they say, well, we're actually not going to work on older bikes. Many in the industry, or many within the community, let's say, would say, okay, yeah, we kind of understand that. If your technicians are only specializing in the newer bikes or the newer technology, then maybe they just don't have the experience for the older bikes. And we also know that older bikes, as I say, get modified as well. So it's very difficult for a dealership or anybody who's doing this on a commercial scale to try and spend the time and investigate what has gone wrong, and then also try and source the parts for a very old motorcycle. It just might not be economical for them to do so, and that's why they actually pull away from it. So I can kind of see the logic, but 5 years old motorcycles, 10-year-old motorcycles, well, we've got to think to the future now. And this recent videos I've been doing about Harley Davidson strategy, if you look to the future and see how the technology is changing, you can kind of understand the logic. Now, of course, this is not for certain. This is not a definitive suggestion by Harley Davidson themselves, but this is kind of going through the industry right now, not only in motorcycles but also in cars as well, car dealerships and car manufacturers, to say actually we don't need to support really old vehicles. Maybe we just need to support, all the part suppliers need to be able to have that support as well for parts. But we as a dealership, we as a motor company, don't need to provide any support. So they're possibly looking at a framework where it's easier for independent workshops to gain access to old information. In fact, independent dealerships, what they tend to do is buy up all the workshop manuals, let's say, from all these old bikes, and that's how they work on it. They buy up all the old parts catalogs, and then they source all those parts that they can get. So it's probably better for independent workshops to do it, or you as an individual at home, rather than a dealership doing it. So you can see the logic. You can see if technology is changing, going in a completely different route or in a different direction, and then you've only got younger mechanics coming through and they're only ever used to working on the newer technology. Well, it kind of makes sense that they shouldn't really be working on older technology if they have no experience with it. But still, you've got to ask yourself, what, 5-10 years old? Let's say a 10-year-old bike, is that really too old? We're in the cusp of change right now between internal combustion engines and electric vehicles and hybrid engines, and the way that's going to be implemented within, let's say, motorcycle engines, motorcycle power plants. You know, are they going to be using fossil fuels? Are they going to be using some kind of organic material? Are they going to be using some environmentally friendly go-go juice? Who knows what's going to happen in the next sort of 10-15 years. But during this transition period, there's going to be a lot of change, of course, and the new technicians coming through and the dealerships of whatever manufacturer are going to have to move with that time and move with that technology as well. Because let's face it, people are going to be buying the newer technology as new products rather than the older technology. So it kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense to have a strategy to say, well, actually, we as manufacturer, we're not going to do anything older than 10 years old, but we're going to enable independent workshops or independent owners to have more flexibility in being able to order parts and work on their bikes. It kind of makes sense, really. Now, I do want to stress, this is not a definitive, and this is definitely not something that has even been seriously considered, I dare say. And maybe even the dealerships themselves, you know, some may work on 20-30-year-old bikes. It really depends. Others are saying, no, 5-year-old bike, 10-year-old bike, we're not touching it. Anything pre-M8, we're not touching it. It really depends. It depends on the dealership, it depends where you are, and also depends on the condition of the bike and what other work has been done on it. As we know, as I keep on stressing, you know, bikes can be heavily modified, and then as an independent mechanic or as a mechanic from a dealership, they can say, well, exactly what's happened to that bike, you know. So you have to diagnose, fault find what somebody else has done to try and fix a bike. And as I say, it just may not be efficient and economical for a dealership to do it. So the practice may already be happening now, but it could actually be a policy or a strategy in years to come. Watch this space, this could happen. Anyway, I hope you found that useful. Let us know your thoughts about this, about the motor company or the manufacturer, Harley Davidson, let's say in this case, or a dealership, the amount of support they should give to older motorcycles. Should it be more than 10 years? Should it be only 5 years? What kind of support do you think you need from buying a new motorcycle or an old motorcycle? Or are you basically just going to say, right, 5 years, that's fine, I'm out on my own, I'll just source the parts wherever I go, I'm just going to take it to an independent workshop anyway, so I'm not going to go back to the dealership because I don't want to pay those prices. You know, the usual story that we always hear, that kind of thing. It could actually be something that we're already doing. We're going our own way. We don't need the dealership, we don't need the motor company. We're only really interested in them when it's within the 2-year warranty period. After that, we just do our own thing. Let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell, like and share. Check out the website RevelatorAlf.com. Ta-da!